Hi, it's Pastor Andy with a Friday preview, and this week we are only going to look at three verses, and we're going to do it a little bit differently, at least at the beginning of the message. These verses are from Romans chapter 5, verses 12 through 14, and this really begins a section, 12 through 21, which is some of the most confusing parts of Romans. It is some of the most confusing parts of anything that Paul has written. And those aren't my words. Those are people who have studied this for years and years. Part of it is the grammar, especially in the Greek. Part of it is one aspect of verse 12. Some of it looks very, very straightforward and is simple enough in some ways. And yet there's another aspect that is confusing to a lot of people that I will try to clarify both on Sunday a little bit and in a video that I'm planning for next Tuesday based upon verse 13. So why is it confusing? Well, we've heard before that all have sinned. We see that specifically in Romans 3:23. And we know from here, as well as, let's say, from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that we sin because Adam sinned. We see that very clearly in Genesis chapter 3. But how does his sin impact us today? And there's a lot of different theories about that, but let's face it. One of the things that is not true is that sin is not genetic. It is, in a sense, in our DNA, and our DNA is our genetics, but sin is not really in our DNA. We just say it's in our DNA because we do indeed sin, and we sin because Adam sinned. Again, Scripture makes that clear. But why do we sin? There's nothing genetically that he passed down to us, and yet in some way we do. And so that makes things like verse 12 especially very, very challenging to get a full grasp theologically on. There's grammatic issues. Paul starts in verse 12, and then all of a sudden in verse 13, it's like he hits the brakes and does a 180 and goes a different direction, and then he comes back later. And why does he do that? There's just a lot of interesting aspects in this between verses 12 through 21. It really falls on the heels of the hope that we can have and the rejoicing that we should do in those first 11 verses of chapter 5. But this set of verses is just very interesting, and there is plenty of good information in just the three verses we'll look at this week, Romans 5 verses 12 through 14, to cover a sermon and a few videos that will be next week. So I hope you'll join me on Sunday as I try to break this down, and again looking at the origins of sin, or what we might call evil, from a few different vantage points, a few different philosophical mindsets in the beginning of the message, or toward the beginning of the message, and then moving into what God says and how Scripture reveals that truth to us. That's going to be the heart of this week. Next week, we'll find the solution to it. This week is about the reality of sin. Next week will be about the solution to sin. We've already seen that back in the first part, like Romans 5:8, with that great but God verse. But that's where we are for this week. So again, I hope you'll join me on Sunday for Romans 5 verses 12 through 14.